As a multi-award-winning landscaper in Melbourne with your own business, Ellis Gardens Proprietary Limited, and you've been, I understand, operating since 2004, having a background of horticulture from Burnley College, perhaps it was called then, or part of, is it part of Melbourne University?
It is,
yes. And then also a Master of Business Marketing from Monash. So, and currently employing 10, 11 staff or in your team?
Yes.
Yeah. And doing a variety of landscaping type work, the larger jobs and smaller jobs. And we're looking forward to hearing about some of the very useful plants that you like to use in your garden work and what we could easily adapt for ours.
For the warm welcome, and I'd like to thank each of you at the Red Hill Gardening Society for having me to speak today. It's always humbling to be asked to speak, about what we do. Previously, I gave a version of this talk, and it was called "Plants That I Can't Live Without," and I gave this presentation to the Royal Botanic Gardens last year. I've made some tweaks today. I've jammed in a few extra plants and changed some photos. And today I've called this talk "Some of My Favourite Plants." And this, I guess, it speaks as much to my passion for plants and gardening as much as anything else. And I'd also like to say that for me, it's plants that make a garden. There's often a gap between those who tend a garden and those who design them. And the single most important thing about a garden for me is that it moves me. And when I say that, I'm talking about my own garden. And I guess it doesn't come down to any single thing. It's not about the site alone or a particular object or plant, but it's about the way that, the garden or, the overall composition moves you. And a garden essentially should evoke an emotional response, because that is essentially why we garden. Gardening shouldn't be necessarily a goal-driven activity. It's about the process. Inherent changes come with time and with the growth of a garden, of weather, of maintenance techniques, and simply your changing tastes and how you're feeling. And I always think about the rewards of the ongoing process and the relationship that I have with my own plants and my own garden. And it's the journey that is the special allure. Sometimes people might even call it an addiction. So when preparing my list and notes for this presentation, I couldn't but help think how my tastes have changed, perhaps even in the last 12 to 18 months. And the list of plants that I present today would be, say, markedly different to a list that I may have presented 3 years ago. And the reason for this is as time goes on and more gardens are designed, or, I visit more gardens and I make more and more refined observations, your tastes can shift, and they can actually also, come around full circle as well. And I also really do want to stress as well that the comments I make today, many of the comments I make today, are purely subjective. Your experience may well be quite different to mine. And if there's one thing that I say often to my team and to clients, is that you never stop learning in this field, and you can never know it all. And that's part of the addiction, I think. I'll highlight a good number of species today and point out why they're my favourites. There are a couple of trees that I've thrown in. Most plants are shrubs, perennials, and ground covers. The other point I want to make too, and this is important, is that one photograph of a plant or a species does not tell a story. If you Google a plant, you'll invariably, find lots of different photographs. Often those photographs are mislabeled, and often photographs are not terribly helpful about how a plant will look and sit in your garden. So for all the plants that I share, I'm going to show you a number of different photos. Photos of plants at different stages of their life cycle and at different times in the season. So a good number of the images I've taken from gardens that we've designed, plants in my own garden, photographs that I've taken wandering through the botanic gardens, or even photographs out, on my various walks around Melbourne. So there are many photographs I'm going to share, and if you start, I've actually got, I think, probably around 300 photographs. So if you're all starting to get a bit bored, maybe you need to tell me and I can wrap it up sooner. So what makes a must-have plant? So William Morris said, have nothing in your house that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. So one could say, you know, the same thing about our gardens. My must-have plants, I always say, you know, they must be useful. They must be obliging, versatile. And the important thing as well is that a great plant should bring definition to other species. And when I say that, I mean a plant, a single species alone can look okay, but you pair it with something else and it looks spectacular. And the other thing I want to say is that obviously useful plants will look great for as long as possible throughout the year. So my must-have plant list. So a plant that is often overlooked is Serotonia, or the carob tree. This is an absolutely brilliant plant and highly underutilized in Australia, in Victoria. It's a perfect plant for the Mornington Peninsula. This evergreen tree, it's native to Southern Europe. I've seen many specimens growing around the Mediterranean. Here it is here. This is a photograph of a carob that I took on Crete 2 years ago. Pruned up into a small tree like this. It's a tree that tends to grow as wide as it is tall. It's extremely useful when grown as a hedge. It's coastal tolerant. It's incredibly obliging, super tough. And the foliage seems even somewhat quite soft, as you can see with the new growth. It actually looks quite soft, which belies its toughness. Highly drought tolerant. So it can be kept pruned as a small evergreen tree, an elegant tree. You can strip up the lower trunks to expose, lift the petticoat of the tree and make it feel anchored, make it look anchored like as a small tree in the garden. It can be used to create a hedge, also a windbreak hedge as well. And given its coastal tolerance, it can also be happily planted behind swimming pools as well. It can be used in not just coastal gardens, on rooftops. It can be applied and used in many, many different ways. And the species itself has a very interesting history. The seeds were used as a measure for gold. So the word carat is derived from this tree. So you can look that up for further information if that is of interest. And if you've driven through the Barossa Valley in South Australia, you'll see very old specimens of this tree along, the main roads, and it's also used extensively as hedging as well. It's an absolutely brilliant plant. Close up of the foliage. This is actually of a tree that I grew out just west of Colac at a country property we had, and north of the Otways. This is a specimen in the St Kilda Botanic Gardens. It's a brilliant plant. Helleborus argutifolius, or the Corsican hellebore. So of course you would be familiar with Helleborus orientalis. So there's Helleborus orientalis. It's not Helleborus orientalis, it's Helleborus argutifolius. So it's quite different to the Lenten rose. So this would be the toughest and the hardest working hellebore that there is. It's native to the islands of Corsica and Sardinia. It's incredibly versatile. It loves a sunny aspect, but it will do just as well in part shade as well. I probably wouldn't say, it's perhaps not deep shade, but part shade, it's absolutely fine. The foliage is dramatic. And in fact, I've picked the foliage many times to put in a vase. The leaves are serrated. So the species argutifolius means with sharply toothed leaves, and that is it there. So you can see very, very attractive foliage. This is an image of a garden, a planting of it in a garden in Richmond that we did. This is an image I've got from the internet, mass planting of it there. This is a photograph taken at the Botanic Gardens. This is my own home garden. Here in late winter, early spring, great flowers come through. And then it darkens off during summer. As you can see there, there's the other shot at the Melbourne Botanic Gardens. That's a residential garden in Middle Park. Another completely different species. Oh, I should actually just add to that as well. I think that Helleborus argutifolius is best used when planted in a minimum of 3 clumpings of, I would suggest a minimum of 3 or 5 together. Works very well, and the foliage can be a great contrast to many other different species in the garden. So the other thing as well, if you don't prune off the flower heads after the flowers have been pollinated, you end up with many hundreds of baby plants in the garden that you can hand off to family and friends as well. And given the green flowers, they're not white, but they're green, creamy white green. They can be used with countless other plants in the garden and other flowers. Great plant, great for the front of the garden bed or second tier planting. So another plant that I absolutely love is Miscanthus transmorrisonensis, or evergreen feathergrass. So breaking down the species name, so it's an unusually long name. I'll go back so you can write that down again. So the word trans meaning across, morrisonensis meaning of Mount Morrison, which is in the Yushan region of Taiwan. So this is occasionally called Taiwanese evergreen grass. This is an excellent strappy plant, which in my opinion is by far the best miscanthus that you can get, as long as you've got the space for it. So this miscanthus can grow almost as tall as 2 meters when in flower. So, and that includes obviously the inflorescences. So compared with miscanthus, it's easily one of the first to flower. So, and when it does, it almost has a subtle mauve tint. You can't see it there. So this is actually my previous country garden. Where I would plant it willy-nilly and divide it up, and it would work so well. When it's overcast, it looks particularly beautiful. Now I've got a video here so you can see it, because the one thing I think as well, when you see rigid images of plants, it's hard to see how that will actually feel in a garden. So you've got to think of the way that a plant moves in a space as well. And miscanthus is incredibly romantic, and even though it's very, very tough, it brings romance and femininity and lightness to a space. So if there's a great deal of wind, the seed heads can appear blown as well. So there's a close-up, you can see that mauve hint through there. Here paired with euphorbias, correas, olearia. This is sort of after some strong winds through summer. This photograph was taken, I think, in late February. So when the seed heads are blown like this, I don't like the grass as much as when it looks like this, but it's obviously just part of the life cycle. There it is there. This is in a residential garden in Elstonwick. So, and this is on the southern side of the house as well. So it works very, very well. And it is called evergreen miscanthus because you don't need to prune it down each year. I find though, sometimes it's best to do that because then you get lovely new growth and fresh new leaves coming through. But look, if the leaves are mostly undamaged, all you need to do is remove the inflorescences and cut those off. It works brilliantly at the base of eucalypts. It will grow quite merrily, just needed maybe a couple of waterings before it becomes established, and then you can just let it go. Super, super tough and incredibly obliging. Handles part shade, full sun, appropriate for city gardens, country gardens. Let me just show you. This is an image of the same plant used in a garden in Richmond at the back of a pool. So at the back of a pool. So the paling fence, was about with this retainer wall at the back of the fence, at the back of the pool. The miscanthus grew here to just over 2 meters. So very, very useful. Here it is here. planted at the base of smooth mahogany trees. So super tough. The next plant is an absolute favorite. We use this so often and return to it time and time again because of it just ticks so many boxes. This is a very fast growing, obliging plant. And when many people see images of this plant, when we have it on a planting plan, many people don't feel terribly excited about it until I explain the merits. So it's super fast growing. It can handle all aspects, deeper shade, all the way through to full sun. It can handle all soil types. It endeavors to be everything to everyone and just about achieves that. So don't confuse this with Elaeagnus pungens, which has a semi-weeping form. I prefer this one, Elaeagnus ebengii, because it's actually more shrub-like. So from the left, this is a photograph of the plant in late winter, early spring, and it's called sometimes this plant. So it's called Russian olive, and it takes on a powdery bloom at the end of winter, early spring. This is the plant maybe in around October, November. So it's lightening off, losing that plume. And there it is in summer, where you can see a little bit of the plume left, but that bloom, I should say, but where the foliage is darkened off. So the plant can flowers mostly in autumn. It also has a really beautiful vanilla scent, and it's the sort of scent that you think, oh, where is that gorgeous, that gorgeous scent coming from? It's not obvious. It's not immediately obvious where it comes from because the flowers are really significant and often hidden beneath the foliage. This is the same plant, Elaeagnus ebengii, on a rooftop in St Kilda. This is a plant here. I'll show you this. This is a plant. The garden was planted out. This is I think it was about 6 months after planting, and this was on the 18th floor of a rooftop garden. So it's very fast growing. It's even faster if you've got it under irrigation, though it's not necessarily required. It's incredibly versatile. You can prune it as a single specimen and create a small tree by pruning up the lower branches. You can actually create a tall hedge. This is on the southern side of a house in Kensington. So this is a planting of some hedges that were perpendicular to the front fence to actually break up and create some division through the front garden, and under planting beneath Acacia cognata. So with some lamandras beneath. So very, very useful plant. And as you can see, the plant actually gives you full dense coverage from the ground up. Most species, when used in this way, would defoliate because they would be seeking light. But this Elaeagnus will deliver full coverage, as I said, in deeper shade. This is a planting here. You can see you can use it in topiary. So here it is here at the front and to the sides here, paired with Teucrium, Wistringia, and this one here, Wistringia smoky. This is a particularly useful little plant as well. And this is at the base of an old walnut as well. So works underneath, exotic and deciduous trees, and works in amongst root systems of established trees as well. The importance is, as well, I often include photographs like this because it's important to think of different light and how light actually makes a plant. It will change the appearance of a plant as well. This is another plant that is underutilized, not terribly well known. A plant native to Africa, hence African snowdrop bush, which I've never heard it called this. People just call it Royina. I do believe that this has recently had a name change. I'm sorry to say, I'm not sure what that is, but if you were to look it up, you'd find most references refer to Royina. This is an evergreen plant that can be used as a small shrub, a large shrub, or be pruned into a small tree. So it could get to, if over a number of years, could get to a height of, say, 3 by 3 meters or even 4 by 4 meters. It almost looks like and is reminiscent of a coprosma, but and the leaves almost look confectionery-like, if you like. Incredibly useful, very, very tough. You see this in many old gardens. Many people don't know what it is because it's not very, not widely used and not widely grown by nurseries. Incredibly tough, very adaptable and versatile. So the foliage is quite shiny, and also you get this bronze and almost burgundy hue as well. And that increases in winter, similar to, say, Nandina, which reddens up in the cooler weather. The same can be said here. So this image was taken in spring. You can see that you've got the new growth coming through and the burgundy foliage is receding. It can be used in topiary if that's your thing as well. There it is in winter. Here it is at the back of Euphorbia caraceus. Now, the reason it's been used here in this way is that we've got euphorbias with their heads that actually afford the plant some protection, because the only downfall of this plant is that it is sometimes not so frost tolerant. It's not frost intolerant, but it's not the most frost tolerant plant. So in this situation, we would prune down the Euphorbia caraceus, sort of, maybe by the end of September, early October, or hold off as long as possible until the we'd know that the Royanas were past the worst of the frosts. Here it is here. This image I took in Victoria Gardens in Paran. So a very old specimen. There are some very old specimens at Burnley as well. So a really, really useful plant. And it's a plant that you don't sort of maybe recognize instantly for its merits, because it might be something else is in flower, or something else is shiny and new closer to the front of a garden bed, but it's incredibly useful and shouldn't be overlooked. Another plant that we use a lot of, that I'm a big fan of, is Muehlenbeckia. So Muehlenbeckia or maidenhair vine. So this plant actually divides a lot of us in my own design studio, because I'm a big fan of it, but a number of my designers are not. I don't know why, but they're not. So we often have interesting discussions on this. So here it is here, Muehlenbeckia, a close-up. Here it is, here's another one. So Muehlenbeckia adpressus, there's Muehlenbeckia complexa. There's a number of different species that are available. Here we've used Muehlenbeckia adpressa. This is a garden in Richmond, where it is, you can see in the backdrop there, where it is used it's incredibly useful as a very fast growing vine on mesh or reinforced mesh. Can grow in full shade, full sun. One very useful application for this plant is, in fact, I'll come back to it. Sorry, this is a bit hazy. Around tennis courts. So on cyclone fencing, absolutely brilliant. So it's a New Zealand plant. And it's also extremely wind tolerant. So it does need an occasional irrigation, because it doesn't like to be fully dried out, but once established, it's pretty tough. Once you've got this plant, you can actually then grow other plants through it. So clematis obviously doesn't give you full coverage on a fence, but you can use this to grow this up through Muehlenbeckia to bring the floral display that's needed. Another plant that I like to use with Muehlenbeckia, and I'm sorry I couldn't find an image with them paired together, but found this one, Achebia quinata, or chocolate vine. This is a heavenly plant. It's called chocolate vine because the flowers are apparently reminiscent of chocolate, though I've never smelt it myself. This is deciduous, but it can be used growing up through Muehlenbeckia to great effect. Here's Muehlenbeckia paired with ficus. This is a photograph taken out on my walk during lockdown. This is in a garden in Toorak. This is a hedge of Muehlenbeckia at St Kilda Botanic Gardens. So you can see that you can take hedging shears to it, and you don't need that sort of rampant, sort of relaxed look. You can actually make it look a lot tidier and refined. and you can simply, even as a front fence, if you don't mind a fairly prosaic look for 18 months, you could even use this on a front fence, just using hardwood posts, reinforced mesh, and growing this up. And in due course, you'd have a lovely wall of green achieved through relatively low cost. Another plant that I love, oak leaf hydrangea. And you can see that I'm chopping and changing. I sort of don't have the plants in any particular order, but sort of as they come. So this is a wonderful plant. So I like in particular this this cultivar or cultivated variety called Snowflake. In my opinion, this is the very best oak leaf hydrangea that you can grow. So this is a beautiful double petaled form. You can see here the flowers, the heavy flowers. This is a garden we designed in Kew. This is hydrangea quercifolia snowflake. So very large flowers with heavenly double petaled form. And the flowers tend to be larger than just the straight hydrangea quercifolia. So one thing that I always thought for years was that hydrangea quercifolia should be grown in, a southerly or easterly aspect, or certainly have shade, say, from, 12, 1 p.m, 2 p.m. onwards. The thing is that hydrangea quercifolia can be grown in a full northerly or westerly aspect, as long as it does get some irrigation. So, it doesn't like to dry out, but it can handle a westerly aspect if it is watered, if it's kept moist enough. So beautiful dramatic foliage. As you can see here, this is another garden. This is a garden in Toorak where the blooms are so heavy it's fallen over the crazy paving path. Really very beautiful. It also delivers consistent autumn colour as well. And I also like to use an evergreen ground cover beneath this hydrangea, perhaps something like Vinca minor alba, which is a shade tolerant ground cover. So after the hydrangea has dropped its leaves, you're looking through to, a ground cover as well. The ground, having a ground cover will also, assist with, be a working or living mulch as well. A plant like Pachysandra terminalis is really, really useful under hydrangeas as well. This is a plant that's not very well known, but is incredibly useful. Froggrass or Acorus graminis. Brilliant plant. So this is a garden in in Malvern that we designed. So here at the front, we've got Acorus graminis on both sides of the path. So it's called froggrass because it can in fact be used in ponds fully submerged in water, which a lot of people don't know about. And at times when because it's not a widely grown plant, we've actually found this plant from water garden specialists when we can't get it from general, wholesale nurseries. So this particular plant, very, very useful, likes a southerly or easterly aspect mostly, but it's really, really beautiful in that it has a lovely painterly effect. You can see there, as you plant it, it actually has little tufts that change direction. Here, looking down here, this is paired with Macaea bella, the Acorus there at the front. This is Acorus graminis variegata, underneath Cereus maples and Buxus japonica. Actually, just more recently, I posted a shot on our Instagram page of this particular plant, just a photograph taken a couple of months ago, where it's several years on from this. And if you looked at that image, if you were sort of interested to learn more about this plant, you can see how incredibly beautiful it is. This photo does not actually even do it justice, nor does this. But we did select this form, the Acorus graminis variegata, because it picked up on the Acer Cereus, the colour of the bark. So sometimes, those sort of subtle references can achieve some really, really beautiful outcomes. Oh, and I should also say as well, if you are interested in this plant, don't let someone sell you the form called a Chorus graminis ogon, which is a really vivid yellow cultivar. Personally, it's not my cup of tea. I much prefer the white variegation. Next plant, Viburnum japonicum. I could rabbit on about this plant for a long time. Here it is here. This photograph was taken, I think from memory, this was taken at the Ballarat Botanic Gardens a couple of years ago. This is a brilliant and underutilized viburnum. I have an enormous amount of time for this plant. So it's an evergreen viburnum that does not like the sun. So a southerly aspect or easterly aspect or under, dappled light under trees, under deciduous trees. Here it is here. Now, this is a very old specimen, a photograph I took at the Hamilton Botanic Gardens, a very old specimen. So now the thing to note about this plant, it has really beautiful glossy green leaves. The plant does not tend to flower until it's, I would suggest, at least 4 to 5 years old, but you don't necessarily grow this plant for its flowers, you grow it for its foliage, and it is really, really beautiful. The plant, even though this very old specimen is a bit taller, you mostly see this plant to about 1 metre to 1.2 metres and can be very easily kept to that height. This is, again, I think this is Ballarat Botanic Gardens, a much older form, where obviously the flowers have been pollinated to have this lovely berry display, but you don't see this very often, which is why I took this photograph. This is, in fact, an image of the same plant at the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, where a tree had been removed, it had been cut down. And so you've got all this new spring growth coming through that's actually looking a little bit chlorotic because it's in too much sun. So, so it does need shade, but highly recommended. I should also say as well, so we've used this plant under the shrub like Ceanothus trevwithen blue, if you know that, as well as fastigiate trees such as, upright Pyrus capital, or the fastigiate or upright Liriodendron tulipifera fastigiata. So it can be used very, very well under deciduous trees. Highly recommended. Next plant, I'm an absolute fan of this. So Japanese Pittosporum, Pittosporum tabira, or also the dwarf form called Pittosporum tabira Miss Muffet. Now, many people poo-poo Pittosporums. This one, I think, is an absolutely brilliant plant that needs your attention if you don't already know about it. So this is the foliage. This is a shot of foliage I took this in, this photograph was taken in Greece. This is a close-up of the flowers in spring. So for all those people who can't stand vivid, harsh or gauche colors, and you only like white flowers, this plant might be for you. This is a shot taken in Greece, where you've got a low planting of the straight species. This is not the dwarf. So this is basically, a single plant can in fact become a tree, and can get to, I would suggest, 8 meters by 6 meters across. But when you obviously grow multiple plants together, the potential of the plants, you've got all that root competition, and obviously if you're pruning plants to be kept lower, then the root systems aren't going to grow accordingly. Here it is here on the left. This is actually, I've included this photograph because I think it's important to include shots of gardens where things don't actually look all that great. And the reason why I've included this as well is it does actually succumb to caterpillar damage. So that's the one thing that it will, can look a little bit unkempt by or with. That's the only thing you need to look out for. So here it is here, the dwarf form. This is in a garden in Malvern. We've got the dwarf form. So it's actually really useful because it can be grown in shade. So this is on the southern side of a house, and it's self-mounding, as you can see there. So it creates that lovely definition that you achieve with topiary, but without actually the austerity or the formality that topiary brings. So very, very useful. Here it's paired with Mondo or Ophiopogon, and we've got some Buxus japonica, Fatsia, and maples. This is in a garden in Camberwell, so a planting where the team had, so this is at the end of winter, things looking a little bit austere, and in waiting for the new growth to come through, but sort of the different mounds that you can see there, and with the gardenias waiting for the sun. This is, we didn't design this garden. This is just a photograph taken out on my walk, where it's a photograph of the Pittosporum tibera in a garden up to the front portico, underneath some cupressus and olives. And you can see how they've joined together, and it's actually just been the maintenance that brought some definition through there. I thought was quite beautiful. Another close-up of the Pittosporum there. Okay. Oh, and the other thing I should say too about the Pittosporum tibera, fully coastal tolerant. So very, very tough, happily grows in sandy soil. It wouldn't like, if it was extreme sand, it wouldn't like to dry out completely, but look, it's an incredibly, incredibly useful plant. The cultivar Miss Muffet will get to about a metre or 1.2 metres in height. Certainly one of my favourites, and we've used this on many rooftop gardens as well. So one thing to note, and I know I'm jumping around a lot, a coastal tolerant plant is by definition a wind tolerant plant.
Oh, what have I got for you?
What
have I got for you?
The next plant, Virginia creeper, Parthenocyssus quinquefolia. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this plant. It's an incredibly versatile plant. This can grow up walls and fences. It can be trained up architectural wires. We've used this to cloak and drape and cascade off structures. You can also train this across the ground at the base of steps to conceal cracks if you've got old steps, where you don't want to do any repair work. This is an image of Virginia creeper used in over a pergola in a small garden that we did in South Yarra. It's fast growing, generally speaking, pest and disease resistant. Because it's fast growing, it does need maintenance, but it's not onerous maintenance. Spectacular autumn colour. So this is a South Yarra project here, the same project overhead, can be used to cloak timber pergolas. So if you've got a timber pergola, it will actually happily adhere to and grow up the post of a timber pergola. If you've got a steel structure, it won't adhere to the steel unless you're using, say, an etched primer, unless you've got some grit in the texture of the post, in which case you might actually need to use a stainless steel architectural wire packed off the post to actually get it to the top of the pergola. And even then, once you get it to the top of the pergola, if the rest of the structure is steel, it can usually find its way with a bit of occasional maintenance to help it there. Here on architectural wires, the other thing is it will adhere to a wall on its own, but sometimes too it's nice to not have that sort of heavily cloaked effect as well. So sometimes you can change up the way that a space looks simply by thinking about that. Oh, sorry, I'm going backwards. Here it is here. This is a garden that we did in Balwyn, where it's great. This is, look, this is just a few months after planting, where it's already reached, almost reached the top of that small arbor there. This is at Burnley, where it's growing up one of the old buildings there. And I think that's quite beautiful and romantic. Another plant that we love to use is Parthenocyssus quinquefolia. So, sorry, no, not quinquefolia, Henryana, that's a typo, my apologies. Henryana, Henryana, called silver veined creeper. So here's an image of it here. So this is quite beautiful. So despite this looking quite full in the picture, it tends not to be as vigorous as Parthenocyssus tricuspidata or Boston ivy or the aforementioned Parthenocyssus quinquefolia. or Virginia creeper. So this is really, really beautiful, can be used to, you know, as a feature plant up a wall. And it's also, it has a darker leaf with this lovely sort of blushed new growth, can be really beautiful and create a really moody backdrop onto a wall. This is a photograph taken out on my walk just against a garage wall. Another plant that I love, that a lot of people I think believe is quite prosaic and common, but I think is incredibly underutilized, is plumbago. I think this is a brilliant plant. Here it is, plumbago auriculata alba, used in some Cretan urns beside a pool in Malvern. This is shortly after planting, so the plant, as you can appreciate, becomes a lot bigger the one thing as well, this plant delivers so much for such little effort. It reminds me almost of geraniums, because if you give it too much love, you know, love and kindness and too much water and too much fertilizer, it actually doesn't perform very well. So it can survive more on neglect and will give you flowers for about 9 months of the year. Really, really brilliant. So this is, sorry, the shot is a bit blurry. So this is just the straight plumbago auriculata. This is at the Melbourne Botanic Gardens. There you can see it cascading down old, you know, granite rocks, really obliging under a peppercorn tree, super tough, not under irrigation, just doing its thing. And it also, a plant like this can hide a multitude of sins. So if you want to hide, you know, some ugly retainer walls, whether it's treated pine or some old rocks or whatever, or, you know, it can just do its thing and grow quickly with such little fuss. This is the same, this is a cultivar, this is Royal Cape. So this is plumbago auriculata Royal Cape, which is, you can see, has the blooms are bigger, the foliage is cleaner, and the color of the flowers are have almost a luminescence, which I find really beguiling. And this would be my my pick of the plumbagos. The only, I suppose, downside of this is that many nurseries will grow this plant and mislabel it. So a lot of nurseries will take, and in good faith, you know, buy cutting stock or tube stock that's mislabeled. So you just need to, if you are buying this plant, you really need to look for the cleaner foliage and the more, the brighter Wedgwood blue flowers. Really fabulous. Let me just refer to my notes here. The other thing I should note here is that I think it's really important to perhaps not underestimate the value of contrasting forms in plants, and this very loose planting, or, you know, unstructured planting, can actually bring definition to other plants that it sits beside. And I'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. Another plant that we use often and in many gardens, Euphorbia rigida. So don't confuse this with Euphorbia mercenites, which is the ground cover, the one that looks very similar to this, but is actually prostrate. So this one, Euphorbia rigida, absolutely brilliant. It packs an enormous punch for its size. Small and delicate, yet it's architectural and striking all at once. It's super tough. So here it is in a garden in Kew, towards the front, paired with sedums and other plants, catmints, eryngiums and other tough plants there. Here it is, rooftop, that same garden where I showed you the Elaeagnus ebengii, which you can see behind. And I've got some dwarf spruce. You can see those little mumble plants there, and also some Juniper sabina behind there, and some GMs. So this photograph was taken 3 months after planting. You can see how quickly they got going on a rooftop on an 18th floor. So they have to contend with strong winds, and they perform beautifully. So at the end of winter, early spring, you get the great typical chartreuse color, just typical euphorbia flowers. Also with a flush, the foliage towards the end takes on like a rose bloom. Here it is here at the height of floral display. Here it is here paired with some dwarf alliums. So this is the dwarf alliums you can see at the front of the photograph, and that's Ceratostigma griffithii, which I'll talk about shortly. And also, just on this, while I've got this photograph here, one thing to note as well is that sometimes I think some people are too much a slave to maintenance and cut down seed heads, spent seed heads, when spent seed heads can be truly beautiful. And I think that some gardens can be overly maintained. And I think, you know, it's really important to celebrate the form of the senescent, plant in the garden as well. The same garden from a different angle. That's when the gems towards the front were looking a little bit more green. Here it is in the garden in Essendon, paired with Festuca glauca, just after planting. Here it's paired with Eucalyptus caesia and different plants there. And you can see in different light, you can see how it looks so much more blue there. Here this is the flush of red that it takes on. I think that's truly beautiful. We've got some rosemary chef choice just in the background on that retainer wall. Next plant, Perovskia atriplycifolia, which has recently been changed in name to Salvia youngii. But I always say it's always going to be Perovskia to me. It took me years to learn how to say Perovskia, so I'm not going to drop that in a hurry. And I know many people, many other people in the industry have said the same. So Russian sage. So it's neither Russian nor is it sage, but it's called that. It's named after a Russian general, General Perovsky, I think. So Perovskia atriplycifolia. So here's a close-up of the foliage here. This is a super tough perennial. So it's native to Afghanistan. So here's a mass planted. So visually, it's ephemeral, it's feminine, and it moves incredibly elegantly in the wind. So here's the planting of it here. There it is in flower. So it's a late flowering perennial. There's a mass planting of it there. Here, again, I'm going to show you. So moving in the wind, don't underestimate, again, you know, the value of a plant and how it works in the elements and how it brings lightness to, you know, to a garden. It's not a plant for picking, and neither is it a plant that you can dot around the garden. If you were to use it willy-nilly, you would be completely underwhelmed by it. This is a plant that needs to be mass planted. And the reason for that as well is that when you mass plant it, it actually becomes a self-supporting swathe or drift, because a single plant can fall over. But when you plant it tightly together, and they need to be planted tightly together, then that's when it works best, in a tightly planted grid. And I would suggest that no fewer than 7 or 9 together, planted at, say, every 350, 400 mil would work. The other thing is, it is a deciduous perennial. So don't cut this down until very late winter. And when you do cut it down, only cut it down by half. Many people make the mistake of cutting it to the ground, and then you've lost probably, you know, you're sort of 4 months behind. So here it is here, really, really beautiful. Very, very tough. It's as tough as the toughest lavender. Here it is here, late winter. So this shot here, you can see obviously the Iris germanica out. This photograph, you know, it's all in shade, but it doesn't actually show just how silvery those deciduous stems are in the background. Here it is here, that same rooftop garden I showed you previously. So we designed a sculptural light rod garden. So each of these light rods were bronze colored, and we wanted something that was really ephemeral as a counter to those light rods. So the Russian sage, very, very tough. This is 6 months after planting, and you can see how much it's filled out there. This is here, the plants just at planting after that garden was installed. Really fabulous plant, would suit a country garden perfectly well. The next plant is brilliant as well. So this is an evergreen perennial, Turkish sage. So this plant is native to woods and clearings in Turkey and Syria. So here it is here, paired with Phoeniculum vulgare purpureum in the background, if you can see that, bronze fennel. This is a really beautiful perennial where the flowers are on whorls above really beautiful velvety foliage. It's a hard-working plant. It's fast growing, and you grow this perhaps more for the foliage than the flowers. Many people don't like yellow. I appreciate that, but it's definitely worth growing for the foliage. And I've got to say as well, the spent flower heads. So I like the spent flower heads more than the actual flowers themselves. You can see that in the spent flower heads, really, really beautiful. And you can, this photograph was taken, I would say it was probably late September, and the flower heads from the previous season was still on there, and before the garden really truly woke up. So there's the foliage there. Really densely packed foliage, very tough. That's it, with some frost on it, which is quite beautiful. A really beautiful plant. I would suggest, if you use it in your garden, plant it in clumps of 3 to 5, say three together at sort of, 500 mil spacings, and it would fill in quite well. Will happily grow in sandy soil, low maintenance, handles full sun or part shade, I beg your pardon. It will handle all soils as long as there's decent drainage. And in winter, it makes a great ground cover. Next plant we use quite often. We use in many plants because it's so incredibly obliging. Dichondra. So it's native to Australia and New Zealand. So it's a plant we keep on coming back to time and time again. And the reason for that is that it works with plantings of all styles. And I think, all architecture works so beautifully. And it's so softening. And it's a great way of bringing the sense of garden closer to the interior of a home when you have it running through paving, between pavers and across paths like I'm showing here. Here it is, here growing between steps, as a really lovely softening element, just bluestone steps. Here it is here in a garden in Richmond where we've used it. You'll be able to see that we use it as around pavers like that, and where we've got it sitting beside lawn. And the reason we do this is that if we had the lawn running in between the steppers, it would mean that every time that lawn was mowed, you'd need to whip a snipper around each of those steppers. But when you have a dividing steel edge between the lawn and the dichondra, from a distance, it looks like it all blurs together, but you do not need to obviously, give the dichondra the same level of maintenance that the lawn requires. From time to time, throughout the year, if you do grow dichondra, you might actually find that it gets too fluffy and too tall. And the reason for that is often just because there's too much nitrogen in the soil. You might find, after some really heavy rain, ongoing rain, after you've fertilized, it gets a little bit tall. All you need to do is take the snipper to it, and within 2 weeks, it comes back quite flat again. It's brilliant. This is a previous garden of my own with my lovely dog Jack showing off and sitting on the dichondra, paired with some Symphytum grandiflora there, comfrey on the left, and underneath some citrus. So fabulous plant and very softening, and can be used, as we've got here, in between bluestone crazy paving, can be used around all sorts of pavers, and it's really, really obliging. Another thing you can do as well, sometimes you can find dichondra repens in seedling punnets from a nursery. If you do that, a really handy tip, go to an op shop, find an old bread knife, and use the bread knife to cut take obviously the dichondra out of the seedling punnet and carve up the punnet, and then plug those little bits of dichondra through the garden, and they will join up, or around your steppers or wherever you're putting it. It joins up very, very quickly. Super obliging. Here it is in a garden in Turak, paired with some gems, and you see the Parthenocissus tricuspidata behind. Here it is, crazy paving. Sculpture, we've got sculpture on lawn. So if you've got, it can be used as a lawn substitute, as say if you've got some dogs and it's not a thoroughfare, can happily be used as a lawn like this. Here, sorry, this image is blurry. This is a garden in Ripponlea, around steppers in front of an old Art Deco home. Here in a garden in McKinnon, so here paired with exotics and natives, here just around concrete pads, so it's very, very softening. And I really, really love that idea of, rather than having a whole, expanse of hard landscape right up to the house, breaking it up just brings that softness and can bring such relief, visual relief. And it pleases me as well. I find that, everyone obviously has their own opinion, but for me, it's very pleasing when I see greenery bleeding through paving like that. One tip as well, if you're going to, use this approach in your own garden, you obviously want to have larger paving pads. If you've got table and chairs, there's nothing more annoying than sitting at a table and dragging your chair and getting the legs of your chair caught in a gully of dichondra. So that's just something to consider, but otherwise very, very useful. Another plant that we use often, I love this, an old-fashioned plant. You'd all know this one. So Stachys byzantina, is obviously commonly used. The particular cultivar that you should be looking out for is Stachys big ears. That is the one to have. Let me explain why. So this one here, this is an image of Stachys byzantina, where you've got smaller foliage there. This is Stachys big ears. So this is a shot at the Botanic Gardens, where the foliage is bigger and it tends to knit in and become a much denser. It's almost like a very dense ground cover and weed suppressant. So this is the old school Stachys byzantina paired with catmint. You can see that, and that grows very well. But obviously, I mean, many of you probably grow lamb's-ear. You would know as well that once it goes into flower, which is lovely, and it's great to have flowers and to have the bees, but you would note that it actually then, it gets a little bit sparse. The foliage on the ground elsewhere gets a bit sparse. So it's only when you cut down the flowers that you actually then put energy back into the foliage below. Here you can see Stachys big ears in the background near that path light over there. So really beautiful when used with other plantings, that teal foliage. Here, this is that Euphorbia rigida again, and sedums, that color palette, the blues and greens, for me is really beautiful. Here in a garden in Caulfield, North Caulfield, here it's paired with Buxus japonica and Iris japonica and catmint and Scleranthus biflorus. Really beautiful. So the thing about Stachys big ears, obviously, as its name suggests, the foliage is larger, but it also very rarely flowers. So you're guaranteed that it will put its energy into creating a weed mat for you, a weed suppressant, super quickly. And because the foliage is bigger, it's actually, it is, in my opinion, far more beautiful than the straight species. Here it is again. You can see it paired in that same garden, paired under Liriodendron tulipifera fastigiata, or fastigiate tulip tree, and other, that's geranium Roseanne, if you know that, variegated Iris japonica. So, I really like that sort of pairing and tapestry of planting. Here's the straight species here with Acacia cognata. So great, using the reason I put this in, really useful with lime greens as well. So thinking about that color palette. Another plant that's really very, very useful is Beschneria eucoides. I don't know if you are familiar with this, Mexican lily. So you grow this for the foliage, not for the flowers, but incredibly useful. It's tough and structural. The height is, it gets to about 1 meter in height. When you look up images of this plant, invariably people post photographs of the flowers, and it's often very difficult to find a mass planting of the species. So there it is there. This is paired with Nandina nana, which is a plant I really dislike very much. But I will also, it's important to note that comment, because I'm going to show you how I can turn my own prejudices on upside down, and there's a photo towards the end that I'll show you. But here, Beschneria eucoides, so really beautiful because of its teal foliage, but it actually, even though it looks spiky and architectural, it's actually not. So it's almost like the architectural form of, say, Arthropodium. So really tough and very obliging. Here it is on my walk through. This is in the a back street in Toorak, planted at the base of some eucalypt. So tell me another plant that would happily grow just as well at the base of 3 trees like that. You would be struggling to find something. So in this instance, this is not a garden that we planted, just a photograph I took, but here performing and working so obligingly. Highly recommended, and a great structural plant. You can use this also, say, as a single plant, as an accent plant as well. Here, planted under a cypress, mass planted, super tough. Another plant in the same genus, Beschneria septentrionalis, or Spanish dagger lily. So this one is a green. So the last one, eucoides, is blue, the septentrionalis is green. So here it is. This is in a pot at a plant nursery. And sorry, a blurry photograph beside it. You can see that it's actually more rigid than the previous one. The eucoides is probably a little bit more softer in form. This is almost a little bit more, typical, cacti-like, but brilliant, because it's probably a good substitute, if you like, for, say, Agave attenuata. Here it is. Sorry, the photograph is very blurry. This is a garden. I think Tina Crawford may have designed this garden, planting beside a driveway, lots of reflective surfaces, but doing very, very well. And it's also good to find a plant that is very tough, that is green. A lot of people, and I completely get this, a lot of people do not like cacti, find that xerophytic look not terribly pleasing. So finding a plant that has sort of that apple green, that Granny Smith apple green look, but is very tough, can be very, very useful. Here it is paired with miscanthus. So again, looking at and considering a plant and how it can come to life from being, paired with another plant. So again, many of you may have thought, I'm not a fan of the plant in the previous shot, but maybe your opinion changes looking at something like this. Next plant you would be familiar with. So begonias. So begonias, incredibly useful. Many of you would know them as elephant ears. They're of course grown for their foliage. I'm never a fan personally of this particular pink in the garden. For me, it's sort of like a coconut ice pink, and I'm not a fan, but I do choose to grow it simply because of the foliage. So there are a number of different forms that are worth looking at. Different forms. So the toughest form of this plant is in fact one called Begonia schmidtii. So that is the toughest form of the plant, and that can handle full sun as well. And it can be, the form of the plant, these cabbage-like round leaves, can be really, really beautiful as a contrasting plant. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. As a contrasting plant as well, can be grown under trees. Now, I've just been given the light to wrap up. I can just flick through a couple of more images. Elephant ears here. grown, quite great for their architectural forms and contrast in foliage in a garden here. Ginger lily, ceratostigmas, all very useful. Ceratostigma wilmottianum, Griffithii, and plumbaginoides. There's the white form. That's Ceratostigma plumbaginoides, highly useful ground cover used around agave. Plectranthus echelonii, also incredibly useful. And this is the last section, conifers. One thing I love to do is bring in contrasting form. This is juniper or Hollywood juniper there, paired with Euphorbia hedgehog and variegated pelargonium. This is a cascading juniper, Juniperus luchinensis taxifolia, or taxifolia luchinensis, dwarf juniper. And this is shore juniper, great in coastal gardens, sandy soils, very tough. Juniperus confertus here takes on different teals and greens depending on the light. And the reason I include this image is this image is really, I really like it. And this is my last image. And the reason I include this is, look, I'm not a fan of Nandina nana at all, but for me, this planting of the Juniperus conferta and then the Nandina nana at the base of the Lagerstromia